Set in Mexico, the film introduces us to Luis, a young man of indigenous origin who enrolls in a military academy in search of a better future. However, the place is more demanding than he expected. As soon as he arrives, they ask him if he has ever suffered abuse, if he has handled a weapon, and if he has felt attracted to someone of the same sex. He answers no to all the questions except for having used firearms, since his father, who was in the military, taught him to shoot. Then the officer asks if his father is still active, but Luis doesn't answer because his father abandoned them years ago. Luis just wants to support the only family he has, his diabetic mother, so he requests health insurance from the academy. After passing his first checkup, Luis and the new recruits are ordered to undress and run around a doctor who is evaluating their physical condition. Once that's over, Luis becomes part of Sergeant Herrera's platoon. Herrera leads him alongside the others. As they settle into their bunks, they are greeted by First Sergeant Sierra, who informs them that out of all military schools in Mexico, his is the toughest. It doesn't matter their skin color or where they come from. All recruits are treated with a firm hand. If they complete their 4-year training, they will become Army officers in command of soldiers, which is why Sierra reminds them how lucky they are. Still, they'd better behave like real men. At the end of his welcome speech, Sierra challenges any of the recruits to hand-to-hand combat. He'll probably win in a humiliating way, but regardless of the result, the candidate who dares to fight him will get a year with no punishments. Even so, no one is brave enough to step forward, so the sergeant assumes they are afraid of being filmed fighting. Sierra points out that there's no problem with that because in the dark you can't see anything. Immediately the lights go out. Another day, a recruit wakes up with his locker on fire, alarming his companions. That's how they say good morning at the military academy. Later during formation, Luis meets a friendlier recruit called Raton. In the cafeteria, the protagonist meets the rest of his platoon, which includes Arturo and Mario. Their sergeant, Herrera, interrupts them to remind them that they didn't even serve him water. As punishment, he gives them 10 seconds to finish their meals, even though Mario refuses to eat at all. Herrera stands up to punish him, but Sierra stops him and invites the recruits to his table. However, he doesn't do it so they can sit comfortably. He explains why they're called potros, colts. When these animals are born, they have trembling legs and stagger around just like the recruits. Sierra promises to turn them into perfect soldiers. Later on, during shooting practice, Mario reveals himself to be indigenous and speaks to Luis in a native language, telling him that he has a 9-month-old baby. It's supposed to be forbidden to enter the academy if you have children, but Mario simply lied. Afterward, Luis is taken out of a formation by Sierra's orders. Sierra asks him to sit by his bed and places his hand on Luis's leg. Although the young man is nervous, the sergeant says he likes him because he's a good shot, mentioning a task they will do together over the weekend. That same weekend, Luis's day off. Sierra, some officers, and Luis leave the academy dressed as civilians. On the way, the sergeant hands everyone a pistol to carry out an errand, by order from above, though Luis knows that's not true. The group stops at an upper-class residence where Sierra and his accomplices break in to rob the place while Luis stays in the car to keep watch. Even though the heist lasts only a few minutes, for Luis it feels like hours, because he's just committed a crime. After that, the soldiers go to a nightclub to celebrate the robbery. Everyone dances except Luis, who stands there staring at nothing. In the end, they're kicked out because one of them was hitting on a girl who already had a boyfriend. Of course, Luis didn't join in that conflict. Back at the academy, during a public exhibition day, the protagonist receives a visit from his girlfriend Andrea, who tells him that his mother is doing well and taking her medications. Speaking of that, Andrea asks when he'll be able to visit them, and Luis promises he'll do it on his next day off, even though he's not sure Sierra will allow it. At that moment, Mario appears with his girlfriend and daughter to introduce them to Luis. It's best that their superiors don't find out that the baby is Mario's. When visiting hours end, the recruits are forced into a cold shower as they lean on the ground. A small reminder from Sierra and the officers that while they are under their power, they won't go easy on them. Later, Luis's companions ask where he went with the sergeants the other day. He replies that it was just a simple task, although Mario warns him that the sergeants will humiliate him at their first opportunity, the way they are humiliating Arturo. During class, Sierra and his crew burst in to make the recruits march while hurling endless insults at them. Amid all this, the sergeant sends Luis through a small garden tunnel that leads to the forest, where he enjoys a few minutes of peace away from the military yoke. Later, when he reunites with his companions, they tell him they nearly drowned during an aquatic drill, and Arturo had it worst. Right then, Arturo collapses on his bed, only for a sergeant to force him to do frog jumps. Meanwhile, Luis is summoned again by Sierra, who reminds him that he owes him one for skipping the recruit's bautizo initiation. Then he asks if Luis's girlfriend can bring some girlfriends of her own on her next visit. The next day, the cadets are woken up by an officer banging a baton like someone in a sect. It's time to start the day. In the showers, Luis and his companions are forced to skate on soap by the higher-ranking cadets. The sergeants aren't their only problem. After that, Luis is called into the woods, where Sierra's crew has several recruits tied naked to the trees. The sergeant orders Luis to hit them with a board as a test of loyalty, including his friend Arturo. That night, we see Luis chasing Arturo around the academy grounds. No matter how fast Luis runs, Arturo is faster and climbs a rather large indigenous sculpture to jump off the top. Right at that moment, Luis wakes up, startled. It was a nightmare. However, Arturo's bed is empty. The sergeants soon arrive with the young man, whom they caught trying to desert. Even though they grant his wish to leave, they insult him as he gathers his things, labeling him a failure for his family and his country. While they scrub the showers, Luis and his friends lament what Arturo had to endure. Mario insists he won't let the superiors humiliate him. On his next free weekend, Luis finally visits his hometown to see his mother, but he doesn't bring good news. He wants to quit the academy. With surprising coldness, his mother doesn't even care about his reasons and asks if her health no longer matters to him. Left with no choice, Luis returns to the military school. But first he looks at an album of his father's photos from his time in the service. If his dad could bear it, maybe he can too. The next day, Sierra and his cronies invite Luis to partake in one of their favorite hobbies, watching real videos of extreme violence. Then one of the soldiers tries to pin Luis down the way they saw in the video, but Mario immediately jumps on him to protect his friend. He's about to receive a monumental beating, but Sierra lets Mario go with Luis. In the bathrooms, Luis thanks Mario for what he did, and Mario replies that they are in this together. That night, while everyone is sleeping, First Sergeant's squad takes Mario away to beat him in the bathroom. Despite Raton's warning, Luis peeks inside and sees the atrocity they're committing. Then one of the officers heads for the exit, so the young man rushes back to his bed and pretends to be asleep. He sees how the officer takes an iron rod out of the locker. After hearing Mario's agonized screams, the next day at the general formation, there's no report on Mario's condition. Disappointing Luis. Unable to endure the abuse, Luis leaves class to go to the infirmary, asking after Mario. However, the nurse doesn't recognize that name. After that, Luis goes to the office of the Superior General, but Sierra's men are guarding the entrance. Fortunately, Luis manages to intercept General Arriaga during lunchtime. As soon as he mentions a missing recruit, Arriaga tells him they will meet in his office tomorrow to talk. Before returning to his table, Luis is cornered by Sierra, who believes him when he says he only passed along greetings to the general from his father, since they were comrades. The next day, while waiting for the meeting, Luis sees Mario's distraught mother wandering around. After failing to console her, the protagonist meets with Arriaga, who speaks to him in a native language. The general is indigenous like him and has faced discrimination. Everything changed once he wore a military badge. Regarding Mario, the general shows Luis a resignation letter signed by him, and Luis has no proof of the beating he endured, nor does he dare file a formal complaint. On his days off, Luis feels tempted to quit, but he changes his mind when the doctors tell him the high cost of his mother's treatment. At least he won't go back defenseless. He decides to buy a switchblade. Back at the academy, Luis threatens Sierra's crew with the knife, demanding they tell him what happened to Mario. However, Sierra easily disarms him and takes him to the woods, where they force him to kill a local dog with his own knife. Since his own life is at risk, Luis has no choice but to carry out the order. As soon as he's left alone, the young man vomits in the bathroom and breaks down crying in regret. Worse yet, he starts dreaming about the dog, intensifying his guilt. During shooting practice, Luis aims at the sergeants from a distance, but Raton quickly intervenes. Sierra confronts him to ask why he didn't fire, yet decides not to punish him. Instead, he orders Luis to buy some items for him. When Luis delivers them, Sierra forces him to stay with his crew to watch videos of raw murders. It seemed that would be it. But that night, Sierra and his men take Luis to punish him for ratting them out to the general. Luckily, the young man manages to grab a gun and opens fire on them, though Sierra shrugs off the bullets as if nothing. Yet another nightmare. The truth is even worse. Sierra calls him to the pool for some one-on-one time to tell him about the next robbery. Seeing how tense Luis is, Sierra admits he has put him through so much because he reminds him of himself when he was younger. He says he wants to make him tougher. Then he leads Luis to the diving board where, before they jump, he hugs him as if he actually cares for him. Back at home for another visit, the protagonist is greeted by his uncle and his little cousin, who wants to become a soldier. Immediately, Luis makes the boy greet him in military fashion, but the child does it incorrectly. As punishment, Luis decides to hit him with a board. In the next scene, we see Luis, Sierra, and the sergeants breaking into the house of a cartel boss. They tie him up along with his family, while Luis guards the hostages. Sierra takes the capo's son away to abuse him, claiming they're doing the nation a favor, though the protagonist isn't convinced at all. The house doesn't even look like it belongs to criminals. Finally, Luis musters up the courage and shoots Sierra in the head, killing him. He then coldly executes the rest of the sergeants. The family thinks they've been saved, but suddenly the cadet points his gun at them.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.